You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, the Hall of Fame edition of Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You can find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guests today, Hall of Famer Bill Benner and Hall of Famer Robin Miller. I've been looking forward to this podcast for a long time. I've told several people that I was about to record it, and the universal reaction I received was, oh my. Bill, Robin, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Just make sure you got that 8-second delay button handy.
I should make sure that I mentioned that the Hall of Fame part of the introduction is because Bill Benner recently was selected into the United States Basketball Writers Association 2021 Hall of Fame class. And recently, Robin Miller was announced as an inductee into the Motorsports Hall of Fame 2021. You both came, I think, if I read this correctly, to the Indianapolis Star at the same time, and you're going into your respective Hall of Fames at the same time.
Well, no, Bill was ahead of me. I think Bill started a year before I did. He was part of the Kitty Corps with Buster Shepard and Jeff Smully, and that was probably Billy, late 67, early 68.
It was 1968, Robin.
Yeah, because I started.
Or actually, to be accurate, it was the fall of '67. I just started class at what was called the IU Extension, now IUPUI, and I was going to college during the day and working as a score boy, the Kitty Corps, at night.
Yep.
And
yep.
The thing is,
what nobody can imagine is, especially because nobody reads the paper anymore, but to think that the Star was put out with 5 people every night, and that was maybe 6 on Fridays and Saturdays, but 4 or 5 mostly, and we put out 5 editions a night with that group of people. It's amazing, and hell, Bill and I learned from the best: Ty McBride, Bob Collins, John Vance, but it was tough love, and Bill then went to IU, and I started out as a score boy. So it was, the way we made it was, cutting horse wires and being in competition with each other. How many games can we take on Friday night? And it was healthy competition, and it worked out well.
So Robert, I was there, I was a Center Grove boy. Robin was from Southport. So we automatically had the South Side going because Southport was the big fancy suburban school with the 7,000 seat gym. And in comes this wise guy from Southport, and he's trying to, I'm thinking I'm going to be the hot shot here. And in comes this brash, full of himself guy from Southport named Robin Miller. And Robin's right. We did have a healthy competition, but we also both realized we had our feet in the door for an incredible career opportunity. And it was up to us to bust our butts to make the best of it. And through the help of Cy McBride and John Banch and Bob Collins, who kind of opened the door and really paved the way for us. Before we knew it, we were getting bylines in the paper. We were working, busting our butts on those nightly editions and watching the Morning Miracle come out every morning, knowing that we had a hand in it. It was an absolute incredible, joyous experience.
And the other thing is, and Bill will back me up on this. I mean, Bill went to college and got a degree. I flunked out of Ball State. I mean, you couldn't be any luckier than I was, and I was just at the right place at the right time. But we had a guy like Cy McBride that encouraged us, and I don't know how Bill was writing a little league. I mean, you had to start at the bottom. So Bill wrote little league columns, and that was how he got started. And then they branched out and started covering stuff. And I just went out I love the Speedway, so I went out to the Speedway and I just started doing features and then I'd come in to do my night shift, but I'd interview a driver and I'd come in with a story and, turn it into them and they'd pass it around the room and bust out laughing. You think we're going to publish this in the Indianapolis Star? Are you serious? Try again. But that was exactly what you needed. You needed to have that kind of, it was meaningful. There were some tough guys in there, but it was the best. I mean, Bill took college classes, but I think we had one college class together at IUPUI, but I took one journalism class in the 2 years I was in college, and there was no better education than what we got hands on day in and day out at the start, and you could not replace that.
But what Robin had, and I know you want to get to questions, Robert. But
No, keep going.
But what Robin had, he when he walked in the door, he already had a PhD in Moxie, and so, I mean, he would go out and, like he said, he'd go to the Speedway. He started writing sidebars on the Indiana Pacers, just kind of on his own. And before we knew it, he's making road trips with the Pacers, and I'm still writing little league stuff and going, "What the hell happened here?"
Did you really write stories about little league teams?
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, there was a pecking order. I mean, you couldn't, Bill got to go cover Butler once and Indiana Central and football. And that was a big deal. We covered Indiana Central and Butler like a major beat. So that was your first step, and then, maybe they'd let you cover a high school game, maybe. But usually, when you're starting out like we did, every Friday and Saturday night was just, we took every game we took so many games on the phone and with a summary and a box score. I mean, you busted your butt for 5 straight hours to put that thing out. But again, like Bill said, I mean, there's no college course that's going to prepare you for being under the gun, under deadline, like we got to experience firsthand.
And Robin, was your experience as kind of a someone who didn't go perhaps the traditional route? Did anyone else in the sports department at the Star, at Pulliam's Enterprise Inc., or whatever it was called, did they have that same sort of background, or were you the only one who managed to do it that way?
Well, Bill could speak to this. Did David Benner was kind of like, did he go all the way through college, Billy?
Well, he started off in Bloomington, so his route was a little bit more traditional, although David Benner got his foot in the door because he dropped out of IU and started as a copy boy and then worked his way over into the sports department. And again, a pretty miraculous rise. Before we knew it, he was covering the Pacers. So,
and he's your younger brother?
Yeah, my younger brother, David.
Yeah.
But see, those opportunities existed then. They don't exist now. You got to have college. Yeah. You got to have a college degree. You got to go through an internship program. And so we were truly and very fortunately ahead of that kind of curve.
Robin, did you join the Star or get into
the hot
sports? Did you get into sports journalism with the goal of covering motorsports, the 500, or did that just kind of happen naturally?
No, I mean, Bill probably did the same. I was a sports editor in my high school newspaper, and I loved sports, and I was a terrible student, and I couldn't concentrate on anything but sports, and so I stood for Jim Hurtubise when I was 18 at the Speedway before I started working at the Star, and I followed him around the Midwest, and I loved racing. But you can't ever, when you're answering the score phones like Bill and I were, like we used to laugh. We used to say, why would somebody care who won the Brown-Harvard basketball game? Who cares? Well, they were all gamblers, but we didn't know. I mean, we had no idea. So I don't know that there was anything. Bill liked college sports a lot, and so that was kind of. But then before he got the IU basketball beat, he was the Pacers beat writer, and that was probably some of the best experience he's ever going to get. But he always liked, I think probably I'm speaking for him, but basketball was probably his favorite sport to write about stuff. And then he got to branch out and do the Olympics and Pan Am Games and stuff like that, which is probably the best writing he ever did. But I don't think anybody goes into I don't know that we went in. We were just trying to make sure nobody got mad at us and threw us out. And we had, there were times when there was just a couple of us in there because some of the boys went out for dinner and never came back because they got plowed. They were drunk. So Bill and I learned how to lay out the paper probably sooner than we should have too.
Bill, was basketball? I know we talked about this in the podcast that I recorded with you a couple of years ago. Actually, I think Bill was my second podcast guest, but is basketball something you kind of focused on?
Well, I mean, yeah, because when I finally became full-time after I left Bloomington in 1971, spent a short time in the Army, then when I started off covering high school sports, and certainly high school basketball was the king then. And so I covered high school sports, primarily basketball, for 3 years after I got out of IU. And then in 1974, as Market Square Arena opened, Dave Overpeck, who had been the Pacers beat writer, they brought in a hockey team, the WHA in Indianapolis Racers. Overpeck loved hockey and wanted to cover hockey. Wayne Gretzky was on that team for a short time. So Overpeck gravitated to the hockey team. That opened up the Pacers beat, and somehow they anointed me, and that's kind of really where it all took off for me. But Robert, again, by the force of his personality, the force of his incredible work ethic, he went and created. Ray Marquette was the motorsports writer for the Star at the time. But Robin, just because this incredible work ethic, he go cover stories at the Speedway during the day, and then come back and work the desk or the slot at the Star that night. And like he said, he stooged for Jim Hurtubise. He was he stooged for a guy named Bill Finley, who was an IndyCar builder back in the time. And Robin just made his way into that beat, and eventually really took it over and became the premier open wheel motorsports writer of the era, which continues.
And explain what stooge means.
But I gotta say that stooge, well, that you did errands and stuff, and you weren't allowed to touch the school box. Stooges, I had to take Jim's goggles onto his helmet, and I had to help push the car after we got it started, and I had to help buckle his seatbelts, and I showed him the pit board, but I wasn't allowed. He had to fire me because I ruined the paint job once when he just got Pepsi Frito-Lay, and I was free help, and he fired me. So it's pretty demoralizing when your hero fires you and you're not getting paid. But the thing about Ray Marquette, Ray got me my job at the Star, and Ray really. He didn't like racing anymore. He loved IU basketball and football. Ray liked anything that kept him out of the office, bless his heart. And I don't, you can't blame him. That was kind of what you didn't want to be in the office then. Bill and I didn't care. We loved being in the office. But Ray, I said, I'm going to start doing sprint car midget stories and dirt car stories. So that's what really, I started covering all these races nobody else wanted to mess with. So that just, then finally I started doing a little USAC column every week, and that grew into like a 40 a week column. So there was just, like Bill said, the opportunities we had don't exist anymore. There's hardly any motorsports writers left in any newspaper in the country. The LA Times got rid of theirs. The Chicago Tribune doesn't have one. The New York Post doesn't have one. The Miami Herald got rid of it. So, it's so hard. But I just feel bad for all these kids that come out of journalism school, and you wonder what the hell are they going to do, because the newspapers are dying on the vine and magazines aren't doing very well, and you just wonder how are they going to make it. But if you had AJ Foyt and I talk all the time, and he's always commiserating about how he was born in the perfect era, and I said I think he probably was. AJ was born in 1935, but the racing he did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was the greatest era there was. It was also the greatest era for basketball. And I was just thinking about this before we started this thing. This is the weekend, fellas, of the high school. This is the week of the high school basketball tournament. You know what a big deal that used to be in Bill Benner and I's life? I mean, you couldn't wait to get the drawings and the pairings to see who was playing who. We covered every game, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It was unbelievable, and it was exciting. And now nobody even knows it exists.
Well, I was just going to ask you about eras, because I was going to say to both of you, and Bill, you go first, then you throw it over to Robin. You guys came into sports journalism in what could be called, in some ways, the golden era of many different sports at more levels than just one. The Pacers are just coming on into their own. It certainly was the golden era of the Indianapolis 500. I can just remember what as I was born in 1967, I can just remember what a gigantic deal it was, both because, as I mentioned before, my uncle, Bob Dorn, was intimately involved with it, his relationship with Johnny Rutherford, AJ Foyt, the list goes on. But at the same time, great era in high school basketball here in the state. How much do you think your careers were helped just by the fact that you were coming into your own as sports was doing the same? Bill?
Yeah, there's no question about it, Robert. As the NBA and the ABA merged, we began to build sports facilities, starting with Market Square Arena, then the Hoosier Dome. We launched the Amateur Sports Initiative with the formation of the Sports Corporation. We began to attract NCAA events, the Sports Festival, the Pan Am Games, the Indianapolis Colts arriving in 1984, and Robin and I were there for all of it. And certainly the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, as you mentioned, in the 70s and 80s and 90s until the split. I mean, it was king. That was before NASCAR began to grow and kind of take away the limelight from open wheel. But yeah, basketball, I mean, I know I'm sounding like an old fart here, but single class basketball. You didn't have Lafayette Jeff playing Marion in the first round of the sectional like we did last night. So yeah, it was absolutely an incredible era, and there's no question that both of us benefited by being there to write about it all. Robin?
We grew up at a perfect time. It was the perfect time to be a kid, because all we did was play sports. And Bill got a good lesson because his big brother Larry took it to him on the basketball court. So then Bill took it to David on the basketball court. They just passed down who was going to abuse the other. But to get a ticket to the Southport sectional, and Center Grove played the Southport sectional, we had like 20 teams or some unbelievable number. Just to get a ticket to the Southport sectional was hard to do, even for an afternoon session. And it was, we had Louis Dampier and Billy Keller and the Venarsdales and stuff. I mean, we had all these amazing players.
McGinnis Downing.
Yeah, but I mean, it was so hard to imagine. I mean, high school basketball was as big a deal as any Purdue or IU basketball game back then, probably bigger. And the way we covered it at the Star and the News and the Times, because we had competition, it was the best. And then, race driver, an Indy 500 driver was everybody knew who he was because Indy was king, like Bill said. And the Pacers, I mean, the ABA Pacers were the first team that captured the city's heart. I mean, the Coliseum and the Pacers and the red, white, and blue ball and Roger and Mel and Freddie and Neto, believe me, that was the turning point in this city. And that's what led Mayor Lugar to get MSA going. And it snowballed from there. But I think everybody that was around to watch the Pacers go start in the ABA and then go to the NBA and MSA, there was obviously a feeling of pride, but it was so cool because we went from, Bill and I used to take our lunch hour, Robert. We'd go out and take our lunch hour to Victory Field during the summer, and we'd sit on the top of the roof in a couple of folding chairs and eat a free hot dog. And it was the most laid, but this is the early 70s. We didn't really have anything, and the Indians were all we had, and nobody really cared. They were a AAA baseball team, and it was nice night to go out for a game, but we didn't have any passion for any particular team in this city until the Patients came along.
The only time I remember going to Busch Stadium when I was a kid was when the Reds would come here and play the Indians at Busch Stadium, the Big Red Machine.
Oh yeah.
And what did the two of you, we'll start with you again, Bill. We'll just try to keep this in alphabetical order to make it easy. Bill, when I recorded that podcast with you a few years ago, you said something I'd never heard before, despite my time in the mayor's office and my involvement in government and politics and growing up here my whole life, except for when I was in the Army. You talked about how critical it was, the decision by Lugar, and then this was seconded when I did a podcast with Jim Morris, how important it was that Mayor Richard Lugar built Market Square Arena downtown. How important was that?
Well, they were going to build it out by Lafayette Square. That was the original thought, or somewhere around the outer belt. And Lugar had the vision to say, we need to do this. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it downtown because we need to reverse the nightly migration to the suburbs. And it was such incredible foresight, aided by people like Jim Morris, to build MSA downtown. And, shortly thereafter, we began to get some restaurants. Back in the day, and as Robin will tell you, to go downtown for a restaurant, there were, I think, St. Moritz, St. Elmo, La Scala, and that was pretty much it. And
the King Cole.
And the King Cole, that's right. But that was it. And so to have the foresight again to build Market Square Arena, then that led to NCAA events. The Sports Corp took off. Then we built the Hoosier Dome, and away it went. Robin? Well,
Bill hit the nail on the head. The book that Neto and Dick Tinkham and I did about the Pacers and how it started, there's a wonderful chapter in there, and Lugar and Lugar was great. He'd call me back, and he, before he passed on, he was still very sharp, and LS Ayers had given. They were going to give the city all this free land for like $1. It's a long story, but it was like, but you're going to have to build it out in the suburbs, like Bill said, out like where the Colts complex is. And that wasn't, so the Marriott people came in and they were looking at coming to Indianapolis for the first time. Well, they didn't want to go out in the suburbs. They wanted to be closer to downtown. And Dick Tinkham, who probably doesn't get nearly enough credit for holding this whole thing together. He was pretty much the Pacers' unofficial general manager and legal counsel. He was getting ready to tell the guys, the board of directors on the Pacers, well, you're right, we can't afford a new arena, so we're stuck in the Coliseum. And about that time, he got a call, and Lugar said, hey, there's a grant out there for like $16 million we can get, and we can build this MSA for $15 million. We'll build it right in the heart of downtown. Marriott will move in. And it took off. And then you got to give Bill Hudnett credit. He builds a football stadium. We don't have a football team, and people are like, this guy's an idiot. He's going to cost this city all this money. And lo and behold, we get the Colts. And then, well, like Bill said, we go to St. Moritz for dinner. We never couldn't afford St. Elmo's and the Star Salary or the King Cole. But then the Colts get here, and suddenly you start getting nightclubs and bars and restaurants and there's a wonderful skyline picture, Robert, in 1965, 1975, 1985, and it doesn't even look like the same city. And it's all, and people can say whatever they want about pro sports, and I know we get on their back a lot because they're so greedy sometimes, but the Pacers and the Colts turned this city around, period. And there's no disputing it.
And we've addressed that in other podcasts, and Bill's been as eloquent as anyone in defending it and saying, look, there simply is no comparison to this city before pro sports took off as opposed to after. But Bill, let me ask you, you were probably sitting at your desk, and then Robin, I would like you to answer when Bill's finished, please. Or where were you, Bill, when someone said, so the Baltimore Colts are moving to Indianapolis. Can you cover this story, Bill?
I remember exactly where I was. I was in Seattle covering the Final Four. And I got a call from, I'm trying to remember who called and told me that the Colts were going to move. I couldn't cover it because I do remember it was Pat McKee, who covered girls basketball for us for a long time. And he was the one that called me in Seattle and said, it's the vans are leaving Baltimore and they're coming to Indianapolis. But I could not actually help cover that thing because I was in Seattle covering a Final Four. But I just knew, and the other thing, and I don't know whether we've discussed this, the serendipity of it all, to put Colts blue seats in the Hoosier Dome. And when Robert Irsay walked in and went, God, you guys built the stadium for me and my team. I mean, that was just mere good fortune. So, but anyway, that's where I was. I was in Seattle.
Robin?
I was at the Long Beach Grand Prix covering the IndyCar race, and I'm not even sure I got a call. I just remember maybe hearing about it and then calling John Banch or Bob Collins and just saying, is it true? And they're like, yeah, it's going to happen. And then John he loved pro football. And so he didn't want to be the assistant sports editor anymore or a columnist. He just wanted to be a pro football writer. And that's what he became for the next 20 years. But it was Pat McKee did most of all the stories early on. He was the one guy that was there that wrote all the stories. And Pat was, he covered high school sports, but I'm not sure. Even in the early stages, we were kind of giddy I'm not sure it really dawned on us what a big deal it was. I mean, we knew it was. I just don't know. I'm not sure we quite grasped the fact that this whole thing was going to change.
But you must have had friends, sports writers from other cities like a Denver or Cincinnati or Chicago who knew what a big deal it was. Did you reach out to them or have some sort of conversation with people from other cities and go like, how is this going to change our sports department and how we cover sports and how it's going to change our city? Bill, did you remember anything, a conversation like that happening?
Well, we certainly realized it was a huge deal. The NFL, it was the NFL. And the Pacers at the time had undergone their own struggles. We had nearly lost the Pacers. And in fact, this is again, another one of those incredibly good fortunes that had the Simon brothers not stepped in to rescue the Pacers because they were going to go to California, most likely somewhere near LA or Sacramento. But had the Simon brothers not stepped in to save the Pacers and kept them viable, then I don't think there's any way we get the Indianapolis Colts. So the construction of Market Square Arena to get the Pacers from downtown, from the Coliseum to downtown, the move for the Simons to save the Pacers, and then the incredible foresight to build a football stadium without a team to play in it, leading to the arrival of the Colts. I mean, we all certainly recognize that our sports world in Indianapolis had changed forever.
Robin?
Yeah, well, all I can tell you is that we were known for the Indy 500 and our high school basketball tournament. Those are the two things we were known for. But we weren't known. And then the Pacers, when the ABA started, then the Pacers put us on the map as far as a lot, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. And then the pro football, the Colts come along, and they're not very good when they start, but it's still a pro football team. And I moved downtown in 1983. And it was, sadly, it's kind of like it is right now. a lot of empty buildings, nobody downtown, no traffic. And then to watch this whole metamorphosis of how this city exploded was just, man, it made you proud. But back to Bill's point, I remember going to the press conference when the Simon brothers took over the team, and I was sitting in the back with Ray Compton, who was a news sports writer who ended up working for the Pacers. And we were just like, if it wasn't for these two guys, there would be no pro basketball team here. And Bill's right. I don't think the Colts would have followed either. We'd have been back to the 500 in the high school basketball tourney, and Bob Knight and IU basketball probably, and Gene Cady and Purdue. But everything just worked out. But the Simons probably don't, we did. One of the chapters of the book we wrote on the Pacers, I remember talking to Herb about, he called me and he says, "Hey, you're not going to make a big deal out of how much this franchise is worth, are you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm going to make a big deal out of it, that it's gone from whatever you paid for it to almost worth $1 billion." He goes, "Well, you'll put in there how many millions we spent keeping it going?" I said, "Sure." But that's just, people don't realize how much money the Simons spent to keep. How many times Bill and I know that we went to the Market Square and the curtain was halfway down because there was nobody there.
Yeah, and at a time in the late 70s, really before the Magic Johnson, Larry Bird era really took off, the NBA was an absolute disaster.
No, well, I mean, remember the Pacers went. We only had 2 years of Market Square Arena in the ABA, and then they were absorbed into the NBA. One of the 4 teams to do so. That put a significant financial burden on the ownership group at the time, to the point where they had to have the telethon. God bless Slick and Nancy Leonard for having the telethon, or we might have lost the Pacers then. And then again for the Simons to step forward, building the Hoosier Dome. The Hoosier Dome not only and I always remind people of this, the Hoosier Dome not only attracted the Colts, but it paved the way for our relationship with the NCAA, because as the NCAA tournament grew and they needed to go into dome stadiums for the Final Four, there we were with a dome stadium attached to a convention center, perfectly placed downtown. We have a world-class auditorium, a world-class track and field stadium. We attract all these NCAA events. We build up the NCAA relationships to the point where they decide in 1997 that they're going to leave Overland Park, Kansas, and Indianapolis ends up being the destination. So, and that's had a magnificent impact, including the one that we're going to experience this month, where we have the entire March Madness. It's just one of the amazing success stories of any city ever. And again, Robin and I were fortunate to be there and be part of it.
Robin,
don't forget this. There was a time, I remember doing a column and getting to know the guy that ran the NFL Combine. And in those days, when the NFL Combine came to Indianapolis, it wasn't televised. The media, we weren't even allowed to go and watch people run the 40-yard. We had to wait in the Holiday Inn and maybe get talk to Peyton or whoever was the hot star that year, but they didn't care if the media covered it. Well, what did that evolve in? That evolved into rave reviews from everybody in the NFL. Oh my God, this is the greatest site for this thing, because everything is so close together. You don't even have to walk outside. You can go from your hotel to the football stadium to the restaurant of your choice. And as Bill will tell you, then the next domino to fall was the NCAA basketball tournament. When we hosted that, there was the same response. People just were like blown away. Like, God, we ought to have this here every year. This is perfect. So, there were a lot of people that were responsible for it, and a lot of people deserve the credit. But it's just, it's amazing to think what we were in 1968 and what we evolved through the next 30 years. It's a phenomenal story.
Robin, if I would have told you on the night of the Pacers telethon, and I've already asked this question of Bill, so I'm going to ask you. If I had told you on the night of the Pacers telethon that in February 2012, the city of Indianapolis would completely redefine what it meant to be a Super Bowl host city, you would have said?
Well, I would have probably said, I mean, nobody's going to bring a football team here. I never thought anybody would bring a football team or a baseball team here because of the pressure from the other big cities like St. Louis and Chicago and Cleveland and everybody that didn't want, and when we had our hockey team and we had Wayne Gretzky for a couple months, could we have become a big time hockey city? Well, if we keep Wayne Gretzky, I'm pretty sure we would have been, but I think there was kind of a knock. Indianapolis is still AAA city, the ABA, they're okay. They get by in the NBA, but I'm not sure what. And then the Super Bowl was just another feather in the cap of the city because it was so well run and it was so organized. And these people love the fact that they don't have to go, they can walk everywhere. And obviously we had great weather that year, the Super Bowl, but people can walk everywhere to get to the events and the NFL experience they had for all the kids and stuff. I mean, it was, it was something that I don't think anybody can envision.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guests are Hall of Famer Robin Miller and, I guess, two-time Hall of Famer Bill Benner. Robin, let me ask you a question. I've wanted you to ask this question since you agreed to come on the podcast. So, who has the worst temper, Bob Knight or AJ Foyt?
Well, it probably Bob Knight. I mean, Bill was closer to Bob. He didn't want to be. Bill was closer to Bob Knight than I was. I mean, he despised me, but I always made it a point to ask him one question every press conference just so he'd have to look at me. But I don't. You got to remember, Bob Knight was dominating 18-year-old kids, and they were scared to death. And you hear all the stories now. I mean, everybody, when he came back to Assembly Hall and all the guys that showed up, I mean, they all kind of appreciate him. Foyt was, AJ was fine if you just, people would go up to him after the engine broke or the car blew up or something happened and stick a mic. AJ worked on his own cars and his engines, and he was so intense at the racetrack. He just didn't, there was no PR people then, and he was there to race and to win. So he was pretty, but I always got along with him because I always waited a half hour or 45 minutes before I'd go find him after something good or bad happened. And, he was always good about calling me back. And I think it's because I raced myself and I worked on IndyCar teams, and he knew how entrenched I was into racing. But I think Knight, Bill can answer this better than I can, but Knight had a circle of writers that he kind of, would feed stuff to and that were on his, and I think they probably stayed that way most of the time, but, he was friendly to Bill for a while, and then friendly to John Vance for a while, and then he'd turn on him for no reason whatsoever. It's just, Lou Henson said it best. He was the consummate bully, and he wanted to bully, and the guy was a great basketball coach. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there's no arguing with any. There's no statement that he's one of the great basketball coaches of all time. But he was a basketball coach. He wasn't a general. He didn't win a war. We were playing. These are kids playing basketball, and I think some of the things he did to people, whether it was Neil Reed or whoever it was, to me, it was uncalled for, and the fact that, to show how tough you were, you had to act like that with these kids. I don't know. Maybe it's a toss-up to see who had the toughest temper. In AJ, in his heyday in the 70s, when he was winning all these races and stuff, I mean, he could fly off the handle pretty quick. But shit, he's such a pussycat now. All these people have come along in the last 20 years. God, AJ, what a great guy. I mean, he's the nicest. He's the nicest guy. Well, he is, and he's really. I mean, he's a different person because he's died about 10 times and come back from the dead. But he's he calls me once a week to see how I'm feeling, or I'll call him and see how he's feeling. And, he's an American treasure. And I realize everybody doesn't think like him, but he did everything he wanted to do in his life, and he did it his way every day. He didn't listen to anybody else. And God, there's very few people like that left. I'm sure Knight does the same. They're very close. I think personality-wise, they're probably a lot, except I think Foyt has more friends. I think AJ was more willing. I don't know. He just didn't seem to. You didn't have to be in this inner circle to be. Foyt had friends everywhere. So, what do you think, Billy? Do you think Knight? Who's got the biggest temper?
Well, Robin, I just want to correct the record, because you did two things. I want to point out that not only did you become a Hall of Fame motorsports rider, but you were not in the Hall of Fame as a driver. This guy, he drove a Formula Ford, and then he drove his own midget car. And Robert, at my wedding, Robin was best man, and he showed up for the rehearsal towing his midget car behind him, because he'd just come from someplace in Illinois. So
that's Southside class right there.
Yeah. But no, Robin, now just be quiet. So, but I was in the slot at the Indianapolis Star the night that AJ tried to deck him at the Motor Speedway, and Robin wrote a very strongly worded column about AJ that he might have been maybe pushing the rules limits on occasion. And so it wasn't always that Robin and AJ had this wonderful relationship.
I remember watching the AJ Foyt Sports Century on ESPN, and I think Robin's on there talking about Foyt spraying a little nitro into his car. Is that right, Robin?
Oh, yeah. AJ was, he's funny now, because I did a 45-minute interview with him for NBC last year. And near the end of it, I said, okay. I said, I want the truth. Who's the best cheater, you or Smokey Unique? And man, he thought he had to think for 10 seconds before I guess Smokey was pretty good. He goes, I can hold my own with him. But that was the only time Foyt and I ever tangled. And it was because one little sentence in the story in the Star, and he smacked me in the back of the head. And Bill and I have a mutual friend, Craig McKee, who's a judge in Terre Haute and works at the sports department. And he tried to tell Bob Collins and John Vance, I don't think we should run this column from Robin, because they're going to be able to prove that he wrote this in anger, and AJ's going to come back and sue us. And that's exactly what happened. And the Star we had to apologize to AJ and pay his legal fees. And a few years ago, Foyt was being honored at the Speedway, and there's about 400 people in the press room, and somebody said, AJ, how have you, there's so much litigation in sports nowadays. Have you ever had any have you ever had lawsuits and stuff? And he grabs the mic and he said, yep. He said, Sports Illustrated, he says, I ran them out of business. I kicked their ass for six figures. And he said, that asshole sitting in the back of the room there typing, Robin Miller, I beat him too. And everybody starts laughing. And I'm laughing because he did. He kicked our butt.
And if you're not familiar with that era, Robin, let me just say this. Explain just a little bit. How gigantic of a sports figure was AJ Foyt in his prime?
Well, cover Sports Illustrated probably 5 or 6 times. And today this is what's wrong with open wheel racing. Mario, AJ, Parnelli, the Unser brothers, Johnny Rutherford, Gordon Chontok, they're all in their 80s. They're all still alive. And other than Uncle Bobby, most of them are in pretty good shape. They are still the heroes of racing for Americans. They don't know who Scott Dixon is or Will Power. They don't know what they look like. They don't care. They still idolize these guys because they were the stars in the most violent era of racing, and they were the gladiators of the day. And, I used to take Parnelli to lunch every Christmas Eve. I got to see my sister and my nieces, and we go to the same place every Christmas Eve for lunch. And Parnelli gets stopped 2 or 3 times, or they come up to his table, and he would go, first of all, how do they know who I am? And secondly, why would they want my autograph? I'm an old man. I said, Rufus, you don't understand the impact you had on people's lives. And that's what when AJ goes to a race, Robert, Like if he goes to Elkhart Lake, there's a line a mile long to get his autograph, and then there's all the other drivers, and there's one or two people there. It's just, when those guys are all gone, I don't know what I mean. To me, you pick up the phone and call Mario, and he gives you the greatest quotes in the world because he can put everything in. He's so eloquent and he's so classy. And Uncle Bobby's one of the great quotes of all time. And Rutherford's got a great memory. And when these guys are gone, although I told Foyt the other day he's going to live to be 104 because he's too mean and he's too tough to ever die. He's the toughest man I've ever met. But when they're gone, racing is so much history, and Indianapolis is all about history. And they're still heroes today. That's why a lot of them love to come back during May. I kid Tom Sneva. I said, hell, nobody knows who you are in the world except during May in Indianapolis. People actually say, hey, that's Tom Sneva. I said, that's why you come back here.
Well, in August, I had the absolute honor of interviewing Johnny Rutherford for the Leaders and Legends podcast. And the love affair he still has with the city of Indianapolis, and we have with him, racing fans, was something that really touched him when I was asking him about it. That Indianapolis is special. Robin, you've traveled the country, I'm assuming the world, covering motorsports, racing. How special is Indianapolis to racing fans and race drivers from around the world?
Not nearly what it was. You could come from a dusty dirt track like the Devil's Bowl, like John Rutherford did, or AJ coming up through midgets, or Parnelli going through jalopies at Ascot Park, or Jim Hurtubise running sprint cars all over the Midwest and the East Coast. And in Indianapolis, if you made it at Indy, USAC was on top of the world. So the Indy 500 was the pinnacle. It was Sports Illustrated covered qualifying. I mean, there were two covers every May, the pole sitter usually and the race winner, and the Sports Illustrated, and every newspaper sent somebody to cover the Indy 500. Well, now what do we got, Billy? Three or four papers maybe that might cover the race. And the thing is, it's not that the drivers, Dario Franchitti fell in love with it. He didn't want anything to do with it, but he got so immersed in the history of it. And he was a big Jim Clark fan. But then when he saw what it meant and the tradition, and I mean, Dario was probably he fell for it. Like he's got a lot of old school bones in him, and it really affected him. I mean, he loves the Indy 500. But you said Will Power had one of the greatest reactions when he won. I mean, he was so excited to win that race. Same with Montoya. They didn't grow up wanting to be Indy 500 drivers. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that's all anybody wanted to be. And if you listen to Ricky Rudd or Rusty Wallace or Darrell Waltrip, they didn't want to be NASCAR. Indy was all that counted. I mean, that's Jimmy Johnson's hero was Rick Mears, for God's sake. They wanted to be Indy 500 drivers. And that's what a big deal it was. It could make you or break you. And if you had success there, you could probably have a great career. And I think the fans are dying off. I mean, I'm 71 and I go to a memorabilia show and they're all my age. And, Bill's daughters are coming to the race this year. That's good. That's the youth movement in the right direction.
And my son is 20 and he loves it. He's been to multiple races and goes out to the track, and Mark Miles takes care of him when he has to go out there. But there is a younger group of people who I think have grabbed onto the 500 as it seems to be on an upswing again. Is that fair to say, or am I overplaying it?
Oh, well, think about this. The Friday before qualifying, there used to be 40,000 people at practice. And on qualifying in the 60s and 70s, there'd be 200,000 people on pole day. I mean, nobody goes to practice anymore. They just stream it at home. Nobody goes to qualifying because they can watch it on TV. Thankfully, they still come to carb day and they still come to race day. But the Speedway they only have 2 days in May to make money, carb day and race day. That's it. They don't make money any other day. So it's not nearly what it used to be. And that we don't have every TV station doing a nightly special. And we don't have 3 newspapers doing special sections. And there's just not that interest anymore. And, kids nowadays, they like e-racing. Like they like they love to have that kind of they get to race on their computer like they're racing a car. Well, that's cool, but that's not racing. I mean, what's the danger element? You're going to spill your Coke on your computer? I don't know. I mean, I don't get it. I understand. I do not get that, but that's just the way it is. And I'm happy that I'm happy I made it to 71, and I'm really happy that I grew up when I did.
Bill, you got to cover so many great events. It's Olympics, it's Final Four, Super Bowls, the list goes on and on. But I want to turn this around just a little bit. When I don't know how many times we've had lunch, dozens and dozens, and other conversations, the look on your face of, I think, real sadness when you mention the institution of class basketball. How much do you miss single class Indiana high school basketball?
Well, I understand the realities, and I understand that multi-class came in 1997. So the kids today, they didn't grow up with it. I grew up with it. I grew up with Milan. I grew up with Oscar and Addix. I grew up with McGinnis and Downing. I grew up with Argus and Silver Creek and Springs Valley and some of the little schools that made it through to the Final Four. I saw Center Grove knock off Richmond in the Summit State when David Benner was student manager in 1972. So I always appreciated the fact that what was really important at Center Grove was winning the sectional, winning at Franklin, beating Whiteland or Greenwood. It was, and now with consolidation and with charter schools and how everything has changed, I understand the culture's changed. But and you know what? I had the opportunity to, when I was working with the Pacers, to certainly be on hand for the multi-class boys and girls championships. And the 1A champs have the same unbridled joy of hoisting a trophy and having a ribbon hung around their neck as the 4A champs and as the single class champs did back in the day. But will I ever get over it? No. Will it be the last paragraph in my obituary? Yes.
We should say that Bill Benner ends almost every single one of his Facebook posts with "Get off my lawn."
That's right. That's right. So, but I appreciate, again, I appreciate that, the world has changed, and like Robin talks about, the media, and it's just a different world. So,
Robin, which was a worse decision, class basketball or the IRL cart split?
Well, they happened at the same time, and it's a toss up. They're equally. I mean, it killed the attendance for high school basketball, and it killed the attendance for open wheel racing, and it killed the interest in both of them. And has IndyCar made a little bit of a comeback? Yeah, there's still a few places like Road America and Mid Ohio, Long Beach that draw good crowds, but nobody goes to ovals anymore. Nobody cares. Nobody comes to IndyCar practice or qualifying. High school basketball tournament. Did you see any of the highlights last night? Did you see the pathetic crowds at these games? I mean, no, they just don't. People just don't care like they used to. Now, I'm not saying that obviously the parents do, and the kids work hard, and the girls practice hard just like the guys do. And I get it. And like Bill said, you can't write or bottle the excitement. If Center Grove won a game in the Southport sectional against somebody that was a ranked team or some big school that they weren't supposed to be on the same floor with, that was like winning the sectional. Just for so many teams. I mean, Southport was expected to do well. Hell, we had 4,000 students, and that was our gym. But all those little schools, the Franklin Centrals and places like that, and the Trand and all these, it was their whole. I mean, that's what you live for. You live for the high school, the county tourney and the city tourney and the sectionals. That was the biggest deal there was. And I'm so glad that I got to see Ron Bonham and Jimmy Rail and Louis Dampier and George and Steve and Steve Alford and pharmacy put on. I think Bill covered that game when he played when he lit up Broad Ripple, and Bill and I were lectured by the Broad Ripple coach about what we did or didn't know about basketball. I remember that, but it was a kind of time. It couldn't have been the worst. The timing couldn't have been worse. I mean, let's kill the high school basketball tourney at the same time we do the Indy 500 and Open Wheel race. Great ideas, fellas. And it's just I lost all my jobs because I refused to get off Tony George's butt. And 10 or 15 years later, everybody said, "Well, you were right." No kidding. Well, it didn't take any genius to tell you that I was right, but the thing that's sad is that Tony really loves Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the Indy 500. He didn't do it to kill it. He just didn't have very good advice. That's the saddest part.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast with Hall of Famers Bill Benner and Robin Miller. Robin mentioned a few minutes ago about your relationship with Coach Knight. You had a recent article that discussed your induction to the Basketball Writers Hall of Fame, and you talk about what a great coach Knight was. If you could choose, given your incredible knowledge and love of college basketball history, if you could choose one coach to coach your team, would you choose Knight or would you choose someone else?
No, I would choose Knight. I would the all-time example of Bob Knight. Well, several of them. 84 and beating the Jordan team in North Carolina with the incredible talent they had. But the 87 Final Four when they beat UNLV on Saturday and they came back and beat Syracuse for the championship. Indiana, God bless Steve Alford and Darryl Thomas and Keith Smart and all those guys, but they didn't belong on the floor with UNLV. And Indiana went out and beat them at their own game. They picked up the tempo, and they didn't belong there, and they just kicked their butt. I saw Indiana beat Maryland at Dayton, Ohio, in the first round. It was another example. This was, I think, 81 on the route to the championship.
It was.
They had no business being on the floor with that team, and they beat them by 30. So
they had Buck Williams and
Albert King.
That's right.
Yeah. So I've always said if I had to choose one coach to win one game, especially if they had lesser talent, it would have been Bob Knight. He was a genius.
Robin, let me ask you another question. It was several years ago at the end of the 20th century where A.J. Foyt and Mario Andretti were named co-drivers of the century. If you had to choose one driver to win a race on an oval, let's not just say Indianapolis 500, but a race on an oval, whom would you choose?
I'd choose AJ on the ovals and Mario on the road course because they're coupled. They're 1 and 1A. But let me give you a little background. When the Associated Press named them the co-drivers of the century, of course, I had to write a story about it. I called Mario up and he said, he goes, it's what can I say? He said, it's an honor to be named in the same breath with AJ Foyt, and he was the yardstick when I started racing, and he still is. And if you finished a race and he was behind you, then you realized that you had accomplished something really special. So I called Foyt up, and of course, what he said was, "Well, bullshit." He said, "Let's have a runoff. There ain't no ties." He said, "Let's just decide it right now." I said, "Well, what do you suggest you're going to?" I said, "As fat as you are, the only thing you could race is a school bus." And he said, because I'm pretty brave 2,000 miles away, and he said, "Yeah, you're right. I need to lose about 10 or 15 pounds." I said, 10 or 15 pounds? And, but he knows they have such a great respect for each other. And no matter how AJ acts like Mario doesn't really count or not really friends, that's a crock because they're buddies. I mean, AJ called Mario on his birthday Sunday. Mario turned 81, and they're just there were two guys along with Parnelli and Dan Gurney that they were those are the 4 Mount Rushmores of my lifetime, and they could drive anything, anywhere, under any conditions, and they don't make drivers like that anymore. I mean, I'm not saying Scott Dixon and Will Power, Colton Herta, guys like that. I'm not saying they couldn't do it. I'm not saying they couldn't run the dirt and they couldn't run stock cars and they couldn't run Formula One. They're just never going to get the opportunity. And those guys not only got the opportunity when they ran with it, they won and they did things that people just, no one could believe they could show up and win a race, whether it was a Trans Am race, a NASCAR race, a Formula One race, Can-Am, IndyCar. It didn't make any difference. I mean, that's how special those four guys were.
There's an excellent article in Sports Illustrated that was written, 25 or plus years ago now, and it's called Twilight of a Titan. And I think William Knack wrote it about A.J.
Bill Knack wrote it. Yeah, it was William Knack, because I spent about 4 days with him.
A brilliant article about A.J. Foyt. We end all Leaders and Legends podcasts with the same 5 questions. However, these 5 questions are different. So we'll go in alphabetical order with the answers, Bill Benner and Robin Miller. Bill, you answer first, then Robin take over. Question number 1. Favorite sports moment you covered? Bill?
Oh, jeez.
We're starting off easy.
Wow. 8.9 seconds, Reggie Miller, Madison Square Garden.
Robin?
Yeah. that I got mine's a tie.
No ties.
Roger Brown scoring 53 points in the Anaheim Convention Center with when the Pacers. I think it was the next. I'm not sure it was. I don't think it was the title game. It was the game before they won their first title. And Bill Sharman. I think Jerry West might have been there. Bill Sharman was the coach, and I think after the game, Jerry West said that's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. And of course, the 1982 Indy 500 with John Cockenmears, the most exciting Indy 500 ever.
I was just going to ask you that question because that was my first 500 was 1982. The end of that race is absolutely brilliant. Second question, Bill, if you could witness any sporting event in history, which would you choose?
Ali Frazier.
First?
The first one. The Thrilla in Manila.
That's the third one. The first one you're talking about in Madison Square Garden, 1970?
No, I'm the one I'm talking about would be the Thrilla in Manila.
Robin?
Oh, God. I don't know. I think this is something that we didn't get to do, but that we get to cover.
Correct. It could be Jesse Owens in Berlin, any sporting event.
Milan Muncie Central.
Yeah, Milan Muncie Central would have been pretty cool to cover. That's a good one. Probably. I don't know. I think. I don't know. Vuki. Everybody had relief drivers in '53, and one guy died of heat frustration. He drove the whole race by himself in the last field. I mean, that would have been a pretty amazing event to cover because it was so hot. He was so dominant.
Number 3, Bill, if you could interview any sports figure in history, whom would you choose?
I've already done it. John Wooden. How about that?
Robin?
Well, I'd say Mickey Mantle because, I'd say Mickey Mantle sober because the one time that I got to interview Mickey Mantle, they opened a Mickey Mantle menswear store on the east side of Indianapolis in 1970. And I begged Simon McBride and John Bench, you got to let me go interview Mickey Mantle. They said, are you stupid? We're not going to let you interview Mickey Mantle. He wouldn't talk to some little pissant like you anyway. and then I figured out they were messing with me. So they finally sent me out there, and the only other guy out there was Chuck Marlowe. And he goes, "Do you mind if I talk to him first?" I said, "No, that's okay." Well, Mick showed up a half hour late, and it took 2 guys to get him out of the car, and he was gassed. He could not put a sentence together. Went to the restroom, threw up, came out. They let him back out to the car, and they apologized. And I went back and wrote some glowing tribute to him and made up a couple quotes. But I think as Mal got older and he got I'm not sure wiser, but he came around a little bit as to what his lot in life was. He might have, if he'd have been honest, he would have been a pretty interesting interview.
Question number 4, Bill Benner. Who is your choice as the greatest Hoosier sports icon?
Oh, man. Well, you know what?
You can have a tie.
So
Okay.
Slick Leonard would be right there at the top. National champion at hit the winning free throws. Indiana beats Kansas. Coached the Pacers to championships. Resurrected the Pacers at the telethon. Went on to become radio icon. And as Robin proclaimed about AJ, I would proclaim equally about Slick, the toughest SOB I've ever run across.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I might have to put Slick at the top of my list.
Now, Bill, Slick Leonard's coming on my podcast. Do you want to co-host?
I would love to.
All right, we'll make that happen. Robin, greatest Hoosier sports icon.
Well, Oscar Robertson and Slick and Larry Bird. I mean, that's a cop-out, but those three guys, pretty, well, I don't know how you separate them. I really don't. I mean, I hear all these guys talking about triple doubles in the NBA. Oscar averaged a triple double, for God's sake. I mean, people have no idea. Today's basketball fans have no idea how great Oscar Robertson really was.
And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was asked about the best players he ever faced. And he said, quote, Oscar was scary and Larry Bird was the smartest player I ever played against. So you're in good company there, Robin. Last question, Bill.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead, Robin. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. And Slick, it speaks for himself. I mean, we need to have a statue of Slick out in front of the Banker's Life because he is the Pacers.
That's a great point. Last question, Bill Benner, all-time favorite sports journalist who isn't on this podcast.
Frank DeFord was brilliant in the day. I mean, brilliant. Bob Ryan at the Boston Globe, one of my all-time favorites, another brilliant writer. But again, I'm using multiple names. I'm going to go back to Jim Murray, LA Times.
Robin?
Hands down, Jim Murray. He can pick up the best of Murray and just pick. It's like reading Ball 4. You just start reading on any page and you're going to be laughing and smiling. He was unbelievable. He was so far ahead of everybody else. And the guys Bill mentioned were good, but nobody could touch Jim Murray. I mean, Bob Collins was a great writer, a great columnist, but there was nobody like Jim Murray. Never has been and probably never will be.
And Robin, let me ask you a quick follow-up on that before we end the podcast. Jim Murray famously, and correct me if I'm overstating this, famously somewhat turned on the Indianapolis 500 with his famous quote, "Gentlemen, start your coffins." I think was that after the 73 race that was so deadly?
74.
Was it 74?
No, 64.
Oh, 64.
Sax McDonald, 64. Why did he turn on the 500? Did you ever have a chance to talk to him about it?
Well, he didn't really turn on it. That was just his. I mean, everybody came down on him. Jim loved IndyCar racing. He came back every year. He married an Indianapolis girl, Linda Ahern, and he went to Long Beach every year. I mean, that was a bad rap. He loved IndyCar racing and became really good friends with Mario and the Unsers. AJ even liked him. And it was just, it was a line that he used for a deadly race that killed 2 drivers, and no one had seen that. The race had never been stopped for an accident before, so he was just responding to what he'd seen, but he didn't have anything against racing, and he really liked Indy 500. I remember when he came back in 96, and he hadn't been to the race in a few years, and he walks around Gasoline Alley, goes, he couldn't see, goes down, sits in the press room, gets his little typewriter out, starts typing, comes down to the star room, and he says, "Would you come down and read what I wrote?" And I said, "Yeah, you need me to proofread your copy, Murray. Sure, I'll be right." No, he says, "Come on now." He goes, "You're here all the time. You're around these guys. I don't know if I'm on the right page or not." So I go down and I start reading this thing, and I burst out laughing because He says, I came back to Indianapolis and they moved. There's no Penske, there's no Unser, there's no Andretti. He goes, the Toledo Mudhens have taken over the World Series. He goes, what happened to it? Was so funny and so spot on and so well done. And the Speedway just cringed because here's the greatest sports writer of all time that just disemboweled him. And Murray was my hero. I mean, he goes, now don't patronize me. I said, I'm not patronizing. This shit's great. You nailed it. I mean, you absolutely nailed what's wrong. And it was just, it was vintage Jim Murray, man.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies. Go ahead, Bill.
I have to say one more thing about Hall of Famer Robin Miller, who wrote a column in Racer.com about his upcoming induction into the Motorsports Hall of Fame. And I counted, and I believe he mentioned 83 names other than himself. And in my view, I put this on Facebook, that says all it needs to say about Robin Miller. In a column about himself, he mentioned 83 others.
Let me mention something else that I heard about Robin Miller, and I heard this in the mid to early 1990s. Never really knew him, still have never met him, and hope to one day, maybe at lunch. But I was told by mutual friends that Robin Miller must pick up the check at lunch.
Yes. Robin is the most generous, loyal, unselfish. The people that don't know him they know what they judged him from what he wrote, and but the person is.
But that's okay.
He's
that's
incredible.
Nice of Billy Bob. Here's the thing, boys. I got to spend my money on something. Bill Benner had to raise two beautiful daughters, and he had a real purpose in life. What's my purpose? I gamble, I buy lunch, so what? Big deal, you know.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guests have been Hall of Famers and damn good friends, Bill Benner and Robin Miller. Thank you both very much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I had a lot of fun, but you got more sponsors than Roger Penske. You might have to get into a different business.
I'm happy if Mr. Penske wants to be a sponsor. And hey, Robin, if you can get AJ Foyt on the podcast, I'll let you buy me lunch.
He might be stealing one of your sponsors. He hears how many you got. All right. Always fun talking sports with Billy Bob and you. Thanks again, Robert.
Take care. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.